Okay, today we're going to do lesson 4, and it's Indigenous Americans, Customs and Cultures. There were and still are many tribes spread out across a vast array of land. It makes sense that, while they shared many things in common, they each developed customs and beliefs that became unique to each individual people group. Today, we will explore just a few parts of Indigenous American culture, but feel free to study this topic in more detail if it interests you. Customs. The first word, custom, is a synonym word with a similar meaning for the word tradition. Customs are activities that groups of people tend to do over periods of time for a common reason. One custom or tradition in American culture is the use of fireworks on July 4th. Americans all gather to remember the day their nation was born and celebrate by filling the night sky with beautiful colors. All cultures throughout history have developed their own customs, and Indigenous Americans are no different. Ceremonies and rituals. As a whole, Indigenous Americans valued ceremonies and rituals. These ceremonies were used to celebrate important milestones, as well as to help them through challenging times. One of the most common practices seen across tribes was the death ritual. Just like our earlier discussion about churches, the details of the ritual varied from tribe to tribe, but the purpose was often the same. Many Indigenous American tribes believed that when a person died, their soul was released to the spirit world. Because they believed this journey was long, they wanted to help prepare the spirit of the deceased to make the trip. This sometimes involved laying them to rest with food and gifts to aid them on their way to the afterlife. Another common practice among some tribes was to place a prayer feathers and prayer sticks in the graves of the deceased. The custom of going on a vision quest was another tradition practiced by numerous indigenous tribes in North America, but this custom was particularly carried out by the tribes of the Plain region. As a young person, most often a boy, moved from childhood to adulthood, he was sent off from his village to discover more about himself as he survived in nature and searched for a guardian spirit to guide him. In some tribes, the young person was not allowed to eat or sleep before heading out on a quest. Imagine how he must have felt knowing you were leaving your village behind, already feeling exhausted and hungry. While the details of these quests varied from tribe to tribe, the purpose was the same. The young person was to have a spiritual experience that would help him guide him toward the future and hopefully connect him with a guiding spirit that was often referred to as a spirit animal. What does the Bible say? Jesus was led to the desert and tempted before he started his earthly ministry. Read Luke 4, 1-12. How did Jesus respond to Satan? What does this teach us about the importance of prayer and the Word of God? How is this similar to and different from the practice of a vision quest? Dances. Dance was and still is an important part of the culture of the Indigenous Americans. Dances were incorporated in ceremonies and rituals and played a major role in many Indigenous American religious activities. As well, dancing occurred before a hunt or to usher in rain crops. Dancing was used to celebrate a victory or to share a story. It was common to see a tribe gather in a field around a fire to sing and dance together. Some tribes would sing or chant as they danced, using drums to set the beat, while others also played bells or shook rattles. Dance is an important part of the Indigenous culture. If you can go online and find some examples of traditional dances, you can also search for the oldest Native American drumming video and view a clip from the year 1894. I would do that if I were you. Okay, we're going on to culture now. We've already learned that most indigenous people were hunter-gatherers who lived off the land. There's evidence that they cultivated the land through their knowledge of agriculture. Perhaps when you hear Indigenous American, you think of buffalo hunters. Did you know that if you think of buffalo hunters when you hear the term Indians, you're thinking about the Plains people? For the Plains people, everything from their food to clothing, housing to weapons, fuel to transportation, and even containers for food came from this one animal. The people of the Plains had a connection to the earth that was built through their lifestyle, and this played an integral part of the development of their culture. The Plains people were not the only ones who had a special relationship with the earth. Indigenous peoples of every tribe had a different view of land than the European counterparts. Although it is fairly easy to understand that different tribes made their home in different locations, what is not always easy to understand is that Indigenous Americans did not consider themselves the owners of the land they lived on. Rather, they considered themselves the stewards, people who take care of something of it. Indigenous Americans believed that the land was there to support them, not to be ruled by them. The connection to nature did not stop at the land, however. Animal life was valued, and it was believed that a successful hunt meant that the spirit of the animal killed deserved to be thanked and honored. Great efforts were made to use each and every piece of the animal that was harvested, regardless of what animal it was. Many of these values are carried on today. Family roles. What is your last name? Is it common in many cultures to be known by your father's last name? European societies in particular are generally perennial in nature. This means that the family tree is traced back through the father's family line. Family land was generally passed down from father to son, while daughters often did not receive this inheritance. Many indigenous tribes operate under a matrilineal society. This means that you are known by your mother's clan. Traditions and possessions are passed down from mother to daughter. In many tribes, women were and are seen as the ones who keep the culture alive. In a matrilineal society, women have more wealth and more say in decision-making than they would in a patrilineal society, regardless of whether the specific tribe operated as a matriarchal or patriarchal society. Sorry, those words are hard to say. Word and men had definite roles within their clans and tribes. Women generally known as hard workers within the community. The men of most tribes were considered warriors and hunters, the protectors and providers for the tribe. In many tribes, the men did very little once they were back in their community, leaving the work at home for the women. Remember that there are hundreds of Indigenous American tribes, so these are generalities that are not the same for every single tribe. Sacred animals. The Indigenous Americans were deeply spiritual, and although they hunted animals for food, they also held a deep respect in their hearts for creation. Several animals appear in their culture as important creatures that represented something. The white buffalo, for example, is a rare animal and therefore was viewed by the natives as sacred. Their prayers, dreams, and visions often centered around this creature. A sighting of this creature was so rare that it was thought to be quite meaningful. This makes sense, as we know that a white buffalo appears in only 1 out of every 10 million buffalo births. In the northern regions, the indigenous peoples were awed by a sighting of the albino moose, believing it is to be so spiritual and sacred that killing it was thought to bring back bad luck. In the Midwest, natives regarded the rattlesnake as especially powerful over windstorms and even worshipped and prayed to some snake gods. Most recognizable of all, however, is perhaps the mysterious predator of the woods, the great wolf. This was perhaps the most revered in all of the indigenous American lore. The mesmerizing wolf represented courage and strength, as well as loyalty and endurance, and thus was treated with the utmost respect and even awe. Many other animals carried special significance to the indigenous Americans and still do to this day. You can find signs and symbols of ravens and crows, stories and myths, including foxes and turtles, and many other animals. The indigenous peoples were very observant of the world around them and attributed meaning to many of the different things. Just as the English language has idioms that don't really make sense when translated to another language, many of these customs and beliefs didn't make sense to the Europeans who first settled in the land. Like learning another language, they needed to be fast students in order to find a way to live among and with the people who called the land home. As we will soon discover, most early settlers were not good students. Okay, I guess that's it for this lesson. Hope you paid attention and listened.